appearing uncomfortable in social settings. But his craftsmanship was beyond reproach. His coffins were known for their quality, with precisely fitted joints and smooth finishes even on the most basic models. It was Zachariah, however, who commanded the greatest trust. Zachariah captured the community's trust and admiration. Handsome and charismatic, he delivered powerful sermons that resonated with the frontier congregation. He had a remarkable ability to comfort the bereaved, offering words that somehow made the loss more bearable. His prayers over fresh graves often moved even the most stoic settlers to tears. Children were particularly drawn to him, following him around the settlement as he made his pastoral visits. "The Reverend has God's own gift for easing suffering," Martha Tunney remarked after Zachariah officiated her husband's funeral in the winter of 1785. "I don't know how we'd manage death in this wilderness without the Ashworths to guide us through it." What nobody in Ashworth Creek realized was that the brothers had specifically selected their community after careful research. They had spent nearly a year traveling through frontier settlements before choosing this location for its isolation, its growing population, and critically its position relative to the expanding medical education system in America's eastern cities. The late 18th century marked the beginning of formal medical education in the United States. Medical schools were being established in Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, and Boston, all facing the same critical shortage: human cadavers for anatomical study. Laws severely restricted access to bodies for dissection, typically limiting medical schools to the corpses of executed criminals. This supply fell dramatically short of demand, creating a black market where a fresh, well-preserved body could command extraordinary prices. The Ashworths were uniquely positioned to capitalize on this demand. Ezekiel had worked as an assistant at Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia, where he had made connections with physicians desperate for anatomical specimens. Moray had developed preservation techniques during his previous employment with a shipping company that transported goods through varying climates. Zachariah's religious credentials provided the perfect cover for their operation, lending an unquestioned legitimacy to their handling of the dead. "We provide a service to the living and the dead," Ezekiel wrote in the first entry of his ledger dated June 17, 1784. The deceased serve the advancement of medical knowledge, while their families receive the comfort of proper burial rites. That the families believe they are burying their loved ones is a mercy. They need never know the higher purpose their departed now serve. The brothers' operation began modestly. When a death occurred in the community, the family would naturally call upon the Ashworths. Ezekiel would collect the body, promise to prepare it for a viewing, and bring it to his establishment. There he would carefully examine the corpse, assessing its suitability for anatomical study. Bodies of those who had died from contagious disease were typically deemed unsuitable, as were those in advanced states of decomposition. For bodies Ezekiel considered valuable, the brothers implemented their deception. After the family had viewed their loved one, arranged peacefully in an open coffin, face visible but body covered with a burial shroud, Ezekiel would excuse them, explaining that he needed to perform final preparations before sealing the coffin. Once alone, he would remove the body to a concealed cellar beneath the preparation room, accessed through a trapdoor hidden under a heavy work table. In the cellar, Ezekiel would begin preservation procedures, typically injecting a solution of alcohol, salt, and various herbs into the major blood vessels. The body would then be packed in a mixture of salt and sawdust inside a specially constructed shipping container, narrow wooden crates that Moray built to resemble tool chests. Meanwhile, Moray would fill the coffin with rocks, sand, and in winter, frozen soil, carefully distributed to approximate human weight. The coffin would be sealed permanently, ready for the funeral service. Zachariah would perform a moving ceremony, speaking eloquently about resurrection and eternal peace, while the family remained unaware that their loved one's body lay not in the coffin, but in the brothers' cellar, awaiting transport. The early ledger entries show a cautious approach. In their first year, the brothers shipped only 8 bodies to contacts at medical schools in Philadelphia and New York. Payments were substantial, between $17 and $25 per body at a time when a skilled laborer might earn $1 per day. The money was delivered through an arrangement with traveling merchants who served as unwitting couriers carrying sealed packets they believed contained business correspondence. Received payment for subject number 8 today, Ezekiel wrote in April 1785. $23. Our best price yet. Dr. H. at Pennsylvania Medical College specifically requested more specimens showing healed bone fractures. Must keep watch for appropriate subjects. By 1787, The operation had proven both profitable and sustainable, encouraging the brothers to expand their reach and refine their grim enterprise. The brothers grew increasingly efficient at disposing of their victims' possessions, typically burning papers and selling or trading valuables in distant towns during their delivery trips. By 1795, Ezekiel's ledgers show the operation had expanded dramatically, with 28 bodies shipped to medical schools that year alone, 19 of them acquired through murder rather than natural deaths in the community. The financial rewards were enormous, over $1,100 in a single year, equivalent to more than $23,000 today. The scheme might have continued indefinitely had it not been for the brothers' growing ambition and the changing landscape of American medical education. As new medical schools sprang up across the eastern seaboard, demand for cadavers increased exponentially. The Ashworths expanded their network of buyers to include institutions in Baltimore, Richmond, and even Boston. This expansion came with new risks, as more frequent shipments raised the possibility of discovery during transport. To counter this, they developed more advanced preservation techniques and constructed wagons with false bottoms to hide their grisly cargo. They also cultivated relationships with stagecoach drivers and merchants, paying them to transport special crates without asking questions. More significantly, they began to forge direct ties with physicians and professors who not only knew of the illegal trade but encouraged it. These men, desperate for teaching specimens, paid premium prices and offered protection through political and legal connections. Dr. M. from Baltimore College has proven particularly valuable, Ezekiel wrote in 1797. His cousin serves as magistrate in Harford County and ensures our wagons pass without inspection. In exchange, we provide him with 2 specimens monthly, with emphasis on female subjects, which he claims are underrepresented in their teaching collection. The increasing demand for specific types of cadavers led the brothers to become disturbingly targeted in their murders. Medical schools requested subjects that suited particular research needs: young men with muscular development, elderly individuals with visible diseases, women of childbearing age, or children born with abnormalities. The Ashworths obliged, choosing victims to order whenever possible. Their final ledger would eventually reveal a network of 43 doctors, professors, and officials who knowingly participated in the enterprise. These included not only medical faculty but sheriffs, judges, and even 2 state legislators, all of whom provided protection in exchange for payments or guaranteed access to cadavers for their affiliated institutions.
By the summer of 1800, the brothers' methods evolved again.
Zachariah, who had long focused on maintaining their standing in the community, began traveling as a visiting minister, preaching in nearby settlements. These trips served a dual purpose. They broadened his influence and provided new opportunities to identify victims. Often these were the elderly, infirm, or recent arrivals who had not yet formed close ties in their communities. On return trips, Zachariah would bring Ezekiel, introducing him as a physician with rare treatments. Those who accepted their help received medicine laced with a fatal herbal concoction. Acquired 3 subjects from Logan Creek this month, Ezekiel recorded in August 1801. Zachariah's position as a man of God continues to open doors that would otherwise remain closed. People trust a preacher who brings a doctor to their sick bed. Their faith is touching, if misplaced. As the brothers grew bolder, they occasionally targeted individuals well integrated into communities when specific specimen types commanded extraordinary prices. They disguised these murders with staged circumstances, illnesses that worsened under treatment, falls from horses, or drownings in local creeks. Between 1800 and 1810, their ledgers document the shipment of 217 bodies, nearly 2 each month, most of them murder victims. Their operation became chillingly efficient. Zachariah identified victims, Ezekiel administered the fatal solution, and Moray managed preservation and transport. Ironically, the community's trust in them only deepened. Zachariah's sermons on mortality drew larger congregations from miles away. Ezekiel was invited to advise neighboring settlements on cemetery planning, while Moray's coffins were so sought after he trained apprentices to meet demand, men who never knew the true purpose of the workshop. In 1804, Zachariah penned a rare personal entry in the ledger, 20 years in this community, and they looked to us for guidance on how to die well. If only they knew we had become the most practiced shepherds of souls to the afterlife in all of Kentucky. Yet danger lurked. In 1805, a merchant remarked on a foul smell from a crate bound for Richmond. Moray invited him to dinner. He was never seen again, recorded later as subject number 283. In 1807, A new physician, Dr. Thomas Bennett, settled in Ashworth Creek and quickly became suspicious of the unusually high mortality rate among travelers. Within 3 months, he too was dead, pronounced the victim of brain fever. He was one of the few victims actually interred in Death Valley Cemetery rather than shipped east. Despite such close calls, the brothers' confidence swelled. By 1810, they had enlisted middlemen in Lexington and Louisville to manage connections with medical schools across the eastern United States. This increased their reach but also multiplied vulnerabilities, as more people held fragments of their secret. The ledgers reveal their business operations had grown sophisticated. Bodies were categorized by type and priced according to educational value. Specimens with unusual diseases or anatomical features could fetch over $100, an enormous sum at the time. They even began taking special orders. Entry. From 1812 note, subject secured to fulfill Dr. G's request for advanced tuberculosis example, and female subject aged approximately 20 with childbearing characteristics as requested by the Medical College of Virginia. The War of 1812 disrupted normal trade, but the brothers adapted by improving preservation techniques to store cadavers longer and by capitalizing on wartime demand for training army surgeons. By 1815, they had amassed a fortune estimated at $25,000, reinvested in land and businesses through proxies. Between 1815 and 1820, the Ashworths operated at their peak, averaging 36 bodies shipped annually to medical schools as far away as Boston and Charleston. Their preservation techniques were so advanced that bodies remained suitable for weeks of transport. Yet America was changing. Improved travel networks reduced isolation, new communities established their own cemeteries and services, and communication became faster, making unexplained disappearances more likely to raise suspicion. This shifting landscape set the stage for the first major challenge to the Ashworth Empire in the autumn of 1820, when a prosperous farmer named James Caldwell, traveling through Ashworth Creek, unknowingly stepped into their orbit. Virginia Road rather than our community. When Caldwell returned through Ashworth Creek on October 9th, he again attended service at the Pallica Chapel. Afterward, Zachariah invited him to dine at the brothers' home before continuing his journey. Caldwell accepted, becoming the brothers' 623rd victim. What the Ashworths could not have known was that Caldwell had recently married Elizabeth Harmon, a widow 20 years his junior, who expected his return to their farm near Lexington by October 15th. When Caldwell failed to appear, Elizabeth began making inquiries about his journey. Unlike many victims' families who accepted vague reports of travelers meeting with accidents or illness on the frontier, Elizabeth Caldwell was persistent and methodical. She traced her husband's planned route, sending letters to postmasters in each town he would have passed through. In early November, she received confirmation that James had been seen in Ashworth Creek on October 9th, attending service at the cemetery chapel. Elizabeth arrived in Ashworth Creek on November 20, 1820, introducing herself to Zachariah and inquiring about her husband. The preacher expressed sympathy and confirmed that James had indeed attended service and shared a meal with the brothers before departing eastward around dusk. "I remember your husband well," Zachariah told her. "A good Christian man who spoke fondly of his new wife. We were concerned about him traveling so late, but he was determined to make significant progress before nightfall." Elizabeth might have accepted this explanation had she not noticed Morai's reaction when she entered the chapel. The middle brother, typically reserved, had visibly paled upon hearing her introduce herself as James Caldwell's wife. This subtle reaction planted a seed of suspicion that would ultimately lead to the brothers' downfall. Instead of continuing her journey, Elizabeth took a room at the small inn in Ashworth Creek, explaining that she wanted to speak with anyone W.H. The Ashworth brothers' enterprise grew steadily as they expanded their cemetery, purchasing adjacent land and extending the road that linked their property to the main trade route. They began offering services to distant settlements, traveling up to 20 miles to collect and prepare bodies, and by doing so increased their shipments to 15 in a single year. Ezekiel noted in his ledger that isolation, which had once made the community appealing, now constrained their opportunities, while Zechariah urged widening their reach. Mordecai developed an improved preservation technique that allowed bodies to remain suitable for dissection even after 2 weeks of transport, greatly enhancing their value. The cemetery itself became a source of community pride, with neat rows of elaborate headstones carved by Mordecai. Twice a year, Zechariah organized community gatherings to maintain the grounds, ending with picnics held among the graves, an event that would appear macabre to outsiders, but was simply practical frontier acceptance of death. The Ashworths occasionally disappeared for several days, explaining they were visiting suppliers or attending family matters in Virginia, but in truth these trips involved delivering bodies to medical contacts and arranging new buyers. They perfected a communication system with their clients using coded letters through a network of postwriters, with bodies referred to as study materials and agricultural terms describing their condition. Fresh corpses were green harvests, preserved ones cured crops, and anatomical features described in lumber terms such as knots for tumors and straight grain for normal anatomy. By 1790, their business was so profitable that the brothers became among the wealthiest men in the settlement, though they lived modestly to avoid suspicion. Much of their profits were invested in land across eastern Kentucky, and they built improved facilities including a larger cellar with ventilation, drainage, and a hidden rear exit for discreet transport of corpses. To the community, they remained respected and indispensable, never suspected of the commerce taking place beneath their very feet. Paragraph 2. The turning point came in October 1791 when a letter arrived from Dr. William Hammond of Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. Hammond explained in coded language that his institution's need for fresh specimens had become desperate, as legislation increasingly restricted traditional sources. He offered $40 per body with bonuses for especially valuable subjects, claiming the advancement of American medicine depended upon discreet suppliers like the Ashworths. Ezekiel wrote in his ledger that such prices changed their calculations entirely. They no longer needed to wait for natural deaths in their community when Providence routinely sent solitary travelers along the western roads who would not be missed. The brothers' first intentional victim was a nameless traveler who had taken shelter in their chapel during an autumn storm. Zachariah invited him to supper, where wine had been laced with Ezekiel's mixture of herbs, knowledge he had once acquired during his hospital employment. The concoction induced unconsciousness followed by respiratory failure, mimicking natural death. Ezekiel recorded the victim as subject number 73, noting the man's approximate age, robust physique, surgical scar across the abdomen, and the swiftness of the poison's effect. Within an hour preservation began, and the body was sent to Hammond, who had requested surgical specimens. This event marked their shift from opportunistic grave robbers into methodical killers. They began selecting targets with deliberate criteria, seeking solitary travelers, particularly men heading west with no definite destination, who were unlikely to have left detailed accounts of their movements. The Ashworths refined a system for identifying victims. Zachariah engaged strangers in casual conversation, drawing out information about their origins and connections, judging whether anyone might come searching for them. Ezekiel observed travelers at the crossroads, selecting those who moved alone, and if they carried valuables the brothers could stage the killing as a simple robbery. Mordecai remodeled their cellar, dividing it into 3 chambers so they could process multiple bodies at once during peak travel seasons. Their killing methods became increasingly sophisticated as they perfected an herbal mixture that left little trace after death, even if examined. Victims vanished without a trace, their bodies preserved, catalogued, and shipped eastward under coded correspondence. All the while the Ashworth brothers maintained the trust of their community. They were praised for their piety, respected for their generosity, and valued for their cemetery's upkeep, while beneath their modest homestead thrived one of the darkest enterprises in early frontier America. Their transformation was complete. No longer merely gravediggers or body traders, they had become careful predators, cloaking murder in the appearance of civic service and presenting themselves as indispensable stewards of the dead while secretly profiting from death itself. In the early 19th century, Kentucky authorities passed legislation specifically criminalizing the sale and purchase of bodies for dissection outside narrow legal channels. Yet the persistent shortage of cadavers meant that a black market continued to thrive well into the 20th century. Communities throughout the Appalachian region developed new customs to ensure their dead were buried as intended. Families organized multi-day wakes where the body was never left unattended. Burial societies emerged, whose members personally oversaw every aspect of interment. In some places, the practice of sitting up with the dead became common, with neighbors maintaining a vigil at the grave for several days after burial to prevent disturbance. The settlement of Ashworth Creek, tainted by its association with the brothers' crimes, officially changed its name to Providence in 1823. Death Valley Cemetery was deconsecrated, and most families chose to exhume their loved ones' coffins, discovering in almost every case that they contained only rocks and soil rather than remains. The cemetery grounds were eventually abandoned and reclaimed by the forest, with only the mass grave marker visible by the mid-19th century. The psychological impact on the community was perhaps the most profound. People who had trusted the Ashworths completely, who had wept with Zachariah at funerals, clasped Ezekiel's hand in gratitude, admired Mordecai's craftsmanship, were forced to question their ability to judge character at all. "We invited wolves into our fold and called them shepherds," wrote Rebecca Lansing, a longtime resident, in a letter to her sister in Virginia. "We gave them our dead to tend and never questioned when they grew prosperous from such somber work." What does it say about our discernment that men capable of such calculating evil were our most respected citizens for nearly 40 years? As the 19th century progressed, the Ashworth case faded from public memory. Occasionally newspapers revisit Kentucky body merchants on anniversaries of the discovery, but full details were considered too gruesome for Victorian sensibilities. By the early 20th century, the case had become little more than a footnote in criminal history, mentioned only in medical ethics debates and largely forgotten by the public. This might have remained the case had construction workers in 1918 not unearthed a metal box while excavating for a new road near Somerset, Kentucky. Inside were 17 leather-bound ledgers, the original 16 seized as evidence plus a 17th volume that had been hidden separately. This final ledger contained the brothers' contingency plans, including detailed maps to caches of money buried across eastern Kentucky and a coded list of contacts who had agreed to help them assume new identities if their enterprise was exposed. Most disturbing were Ezekiel's reflections, which revealed not remorse but clinical pride. "We have advanced medical knowledge more than any physicians of our era," he wrote in July 1821, mere months before their downfall. "The bodies we provided have trained hundreds of doctors who would otherwise have practiced with inadequate anatomical understanding. If each of these physicians saves even a handful of patients, our work has saved more lives than the number we have taken. History, should it ever judge us, must consider this calculus." The discovery reignited public interest. The ledgers were transferred to the Kentucky Historical Society, where researchers analyzed them with modern techniques unavailable to 19th century investigators. They uncovered that the brothers' network was far more extensive than believed, with shipments sent not only to Philadelphia but also to Edinburgh and Paris through trusted sea captains who asked no questions. The financial scale of the Ashworth enterprise was staggering. Economic analysis suggests they earned the equivalent of over $4 million in today's currency through body trafficking (MO). Most of it never recovered and likely hidden in caches described in the coded 17th ledger. The documents also revealed that the Ashworths' methods had inspired imitators. Ezekiel corresponded with at least 7 other individuals or groups who established similar operations in remote Appalachian communities, seeking his advice on preservation and transportation. "Our methods have created a new industry that will persist even if we do not," he wrote in 1818. "The demand for medical science is insatiable, and I have shared our techniques selectively with those who demonstrate proper discretion." Medical historians now suggest that the unusual consistency in preservation methods observed in 19th century anatomical specimens may indicate a standardized approach passed down from the Ashworths to their disciples. The final pages of the ledger describe detailed contingency plans for assuming new identities in Missouri Territory, with contacts, property purchased under false names, and strategies for blending into new communities. "We will begin again wiser for this experience," Ezekiel wrote in his last entry before their flight. "One man raises no suspicion where 3 might." The work continues. Researchers traced their trail westward, but the record goes cold at the Mississippi. Reports suggest men matching their descriptions boarded riverboats bound for St. Louis in early 1822, but their ultimate fate remains unknown. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Caldwell, whose persistence had exposed them, never remarried. She used her husband's estate to establish a school in Lexington that grew into a respected academy. In 1860, nearly 40 years later, she reflected, "I feel no pride, only deep sadness that my James and hundreds of others were sacrificed on the altar of progress. If there is any consolation, it is that reforms were born from their deaths. But I fear human nature changes slowly, if at all." In 1918, construction workers in Kentucky unearthed a metal box containing 17 leather-bound ledgers. Inside, meticulously handwritten entries documented the sale of 637 human bodies to medical schools across America between 1784 and 1821. Each entry concluded with the same chilling phrase, "Coffin weighted appropriately.
Family non the wither."
Most disturbing were entries marked with small red crosses indicating the 418 individuals who weren't already dead when the Ashworth brothers selected them as specimens for their lucrative enterprise. Before I continue with the story of the Ashworth family and their sinister operation at Death Valley Cemetery, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel for more true historical horrors that mainstream historians often overlook. We've heard from listeners in all 50 states who share our passion for uncovering America's darkest secrets. Now let's travel back to the Kentucky wilderness of the late 18th century, where three brothers would transform a peaceful cemetery into the center of an operation that claimed hundreds of lives. In the dense pine forests of eastern Kentucky, there exists a small clearing known as Death Valley. Despite what the cheerful wildflowers might suggest in spring, the name wasn't chosen for its natural beauty. Between 1784 and 1821, this isolated patch of land became the center of perhaps the most disturbing criminal enterprise in early American history, one that claimed over 600 lives and involved a network of respected professionals across 6 states. The full extent of these atrocities remained buried for nearly a century until a chance discovery in 1918 revealed ledgers documenting a methodical operation of murder, deceit, and profiteering orchestrated by three brothers, undertaker Ezekiel Ashworth, gravedigger Moray Ashworth, and the community's respected preacher, Zachariah Ashworth. What makes this case particularly chilling is not just the brothers' methodical approach to murder, but how they exploited the sacred trust of a grieving community. When families arrived at Death Valley Cemetery to commit their loved ones to eternal rest, they were unaware that the coffins being lowered into the ground contained nothing but rocks and sand. The actual bodies were being preserved, packaged, and shipped to medical schools across the eastern seaboard. Institutions desperate for cadavers and willing to pay extraordinary sums asked remarkably few questions. The operation continued unchallenged for decades, expanding from opportunistic grave robbery to calculated murder. As demand for medical colleges grew, the brothers developed a method for identifying ideal victims, typically solitary travelers passing through Kentucky's remote eastern counties, those without family connections who wouldn't be missed. The final ledger entries suggest the operation had grown to involve dozens of accomplices, including physicians, university professors, and even government officials who profited from this macabre trade. This dark chapter of American history was nearly lost forever until a widow named Elizabeth Caldwell began asking questions about her husband's suspiciously light coffin in the autumn of 1821, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose the full horror of what transpired at Death Valley Cemetery. The settlement that would later be known as Ashworth Creek began as little more than a collection of cabins nestled in eastern Kentucky's dense forests about 50 miles from the Virginia border. By 1784, it had grown to include approximately 40 families, most having migrated from Virginia and North Carolina, seeking fertile land and fresh opportunities in the wake of the Revolutionary War. The community was primarily Baptist with a strong streak of independence typical of frontier settlements. The nearest large town was nearly 2 days' journey by horse, leaving Ashworth Creek largely isolated, especially during winter months when mountain passes became impassable. The Ashworth brothers arrived in the spring of 1784, presenting themselves as men of ambition and capability at a time when the growing settlement desperately needed both. Ezekiel, the eldest at 32, brought experience as an undertaker from Philadelphia. Moray, 2 years younger, was a skilled carpenter who quickly established himself as the settlement's gravedigger and coffin maker. Zachariah, the youngest at 27, was perhaps the most immediately valuable to the community, a Baptist preacher with formal training from a seminary in Virginia, a rarity in these remote parts. Within 6 months of their arrival, the brothers had established Death Valley Cemetery on a 5-acre plot of land that they purchased at the eastern edge of the settlement. The name, Zachariah explained to the community, was a biblical reference, the Valley of the Shadow of Death from Psalms rather than a morbid choice. The location was ideal, elevated enough to avoid flooding, yet with soil soft enough for easy digging. More importantly for the brothers' undisclosed purposes, it was situated near a seldom-used trade route that connected to larger roads leading toward Virginia, Pennsylvania, and points further east. The centerpiece of the cemetery was a small white chapel where Zachariah held Sunday services and funeral ceremonies. Behind it stood a long, low building that served as Ezekiel's undertaking establishment where he prepared bodies for burial. Adjacent to this was Moray's workshop where he crafted coffins of varying quality to suit the financial means of the deceased's family. The brothers lived together in a 2-story home at the edge of the property, separated from the cemetery by a grove of pine trees. The community quickly came to respect the Ashworth brothers. Ezekiel projected a solemn dignity appropriate to his profession. His meticulous attention to detail in preparing the dead for viewing brought comfort to grieving families. Moray was more reserved, often a.p.